Good day, everyone. My name is Jeliden Villarino, and today we are going to talk about the essay of Chinua Achebe entitled The Novelist as a Teacher, together with Miss Jessa Saladaga. First, we are going to introduce to you Chinua Achebe, a little of his background, and then we are going to read the essay, the content of the essay, and then the last part of this report is the analysis of the essay. We are going to give you some important points and give you explanation of these points so that we will be able to internalize its content. So I hope you will learn a lot from this report.
The Novelists as Teachers by Chinua Achebe. The essay was originally delivered as a talk in 1964 at the first Commonwealth Writers' Conference held at Leeds. Good day, everyone. I am Jessa Alsaltaga from BE2 and I will be your presenter for today's discussion. And today we'll be tackling about the background of Chinua Achebe, the author of the essay entitled The Novelists as Teachers. Chinua Achebe, or in full name Albert Chimalamogo Achebe, born in November 16, 1930 at Ojedo, Nigeria, and died in March 21, 2013 at Boston, Massachusetts, US. Nigerian novelist acclaimed for his unsentimental depictions of the social and psychological disorientation accompanying the imposition of Western customs and values upon traditional society. His particular concern was with emergent Africa at its moments of crisis. His novels range in subject matter from the first contact of an African village with a white man to the educated African's attempt to create a fair moral order out of the changing values in a large city. Chinua Achebe is also known as the father of African literature. He is a self-conscious writer committed to the multilateral development of Nigerians. So what did Chinua Achebe's writing concern? Chinoa's work grappled with the reality of British imperialism's effect on Nigerian traditions and costumes. He discussed in frank terms the destructive and often violent effect that external impositions have on indigenous people, challenging the prevailing narrative each time that westernization was a positive and necessary process. Just like in his novel Things Fall Apart, Achabe's first novel concerns traditional Igbo life at the time of the advent of missionaries and colonial government in his homeland. His principal character cannot accept the new order, even though the old has already collapsed. And also in the sequel, No Longer at Ease, he portrayed a newly appointed civil servant recently returned from university study in England, who is unable to sustain the moral values he believes to be correct in the face of the obligations and temptations of his new position. So Achebe uses straightforward dictions and simple sentence structures in his writings. In his book and essays, specifically the one we are tackling now, which is titled The Novelists as Teachers, Achebe wants to influence and set the attention of the readers. He wants the readers to know and understand how the British and the European people are considered superior to them.
Writing of the kind I do is relatively new in my part of the world, and it is too soon to try and describe in detail the complex of relationships between us and our readers. However, I think I can safely deal with one aspect of these relationships, which is rarely mentioned. Because of our largely European education, our writers may be pardoned if they begin by thinking that the relationship between European writers and their audience will automatically reproduce itself in Africa. We have learned from Europe that a writer or an artist lives on the fringe of society, wearing a beard and a peculiar dress and generally behaving in a strange, unpredictable way. He is in revolt against society, which in turn looks on him with suspicion, if not hostility. The last thing society would dream of doing is to put him in charge of anything. All that is well known, which is why some of us seem too eager for our society to treat us with the same hostility or even behave as though it already does. But I am not interested now in what writers expect of society that is generally contained in their books, or should be. What is not so well documented is what society expects of its writers. I am assuming, of course, that our writer and his society live in the same place. I realize that a lot has been made of the allegation and African writers have to write for European and American readers because African readers, where they exist at all, are only interested in reading textbooks. I don't know if African writers always have a foreign audience in mind. What I do know is that they don't have to. At least I know that I don't have to. Last year, the pattern of sales of Things Fall Apart in the cheap paperback edition was as follows: about 800 copies in Britain, 20,000 in Nigeria, and about 2,500 in all other places. The same pattern was true also of No Longer at Ease. It is quite clear what this particular reader expects of me. Nor is there much doubt about another reader in Ghana who wrote me a rather pathetic letter to say that I had neglected to include questions and answers at the end of Things Fall Apart, and could I make these available to him to ensure his success at next year's school certificate examination. This is what I would call in Nigerian pidgin a how for do reader, and I hope there are not very many like him. But also in Ghana, I met a young woman, teacher, who immediately took me to task for not making the hero of No Longer at Ease marry the girl he is in love with. I am the kind of vague noises I usually make whenever a wise critic comes along to tell me I should have written a different book to the one I wrote. But my woman teacher was not going to be shaken off easily. She was in deadly earnest. That I know, she said, that there were many women in the kind of situation I had described, and that I could have served them well if I had shown what was possible to find one man with enough guts to go against the custom. I don't agree, of course, but this young woman spoke with this so much feeling, and I couldn't help being a little uneasy at the accusation, for it was indeed a serious accusation, that I had squandered a rare opportunity for education on a whim, social, and frivolous exercise. It is important to say at this point that no self-respecting writer will take dictation from his audience. He must remain free to disagree with his society and go into rebellion against it if need be. But I am for choosing my cause very carefully. Why should I start waging war as a Nigerian newspaper editor was doing the other day on the soulless efficiency of Europe's industrial and technological civilization when the very thing my society needs may be a little technical efficiency. My thinking on the peculiar needs of different societies was sharpened when not long ago I heard an English pop song which I think was entitled I Ain't Gonna Wash for a Week. At first, I wondered why it should occur to anyone to take such a vow when there were so many much more worthwhile resolutions to make. But later it dawned on me that this singer belonged to the same culture which, in an early age of self-satisfaction, had blasphemed and said that cleanliness was next to godliness. So I saw him in a new light. As a kind of divine administrator of vengeance, I make bold to say, however, that these particular offices would not be required in my society because we did not commit the sin of turning hygiene into a god. Needless to say, we do have our own sins and blasphemies regarded against our name. If I were God, I would regard as the very worst our acceptance, for whatever reason of racial inferiority. It is too late in the day to get worked up about it or to blame others. Much they may deserve such blame and condemnation. What we need to do is to look back and try to find out where we went wrong, where the rain began to beat us. Let me give you one or two examples of the result of the disaster brought upon the African in the period of subjection to alien races. I remember the shock felt by Christians of my father's generation in my village in the early 1940s when, for the first time, the local girls' school performed Nigerian dances at the anniversary of the coming of the gospel. They had always put on something Christian and civilized, which I believed was called the Maple Dance. In those days, when I was growing up, I also remember that it was only the poor, benighted heathen who had any use for our local handicraft, example, our pottery. Christians and the well-to-do, and they usually the same people, displayed their tins and other metalware. We never carried water pots to the stream. I had a small cylindrical biscuit tin suitable for my years, while the older members of our household carried 4-gallon kerosene tins. Today, things have changed a lot, but it would be foolish to pretend that we have fully recovered from the traumatic effects of our first confrontation with Europe. 3 or 4 weeks ago, my wife, who teaches English in a boys' school, asked a pupil why he wrote about winter when he meant a harmattan. He said the other boys would call him a bushman if he did such a thing. Now, you wouldn't have that thought, would you? That there was something shameful in your weather. But apparently we do. How can this great blasphemy be purged? I think it is part of my business as a writer to teach that boy that there is nothing there's graceful about the African weather, that the palm tree is a fit subject for poetry. Here, then, is an adequate revolution for me to espouse, to help the society regain belief in itself and put away the complexes of the years of denigration and self-abasement. And it is essentially a question of education in the best sense of that word. Here, I think, my aims and my soul. You have all heard the African personality of African democracy, of the African way of socialism, of negritude, and so on. They are all props we have fashioned at different times to help us get on our feet again. Once we are up, we should need any of them anymore. But for the moment, it is in the nature of things that we may need to encounter racism with that Jean-Paul Sartre has called an anti-racist racism, to announce not just that we are as good as the next man, but that we are much better. The writer cannot expect to be excused from the task of re-education and regeneration that must be done. In fact, he should march right in front. For he is, after all, as Ezekiel emphatically says in his African image, the sensitive point of his community. The Ghanaian professor of philosophy, William Abraham, puts it this way. Just as African scientists undertake to solve some of the scientific problems of Africa, African historians go into the history of Africa, African political scientists concern themselves with the politics of Africa. Why should African literary creators be exempted from the services that they themselves recognize as genuine? I, for one, would not wish to be excused. I would be quite satisfied if my novels, especially the ones I set in the past, did no more than teach my readers that their past, with all its imperfections, was not one long night of savagery from which the first Europeans, acting on God's behalf, delivered them. Perhaps what I write is applied art as distinct from pure. But who cares? Art is important. But so is education of the kind I have in mind, and I don't see that the two need to be mutually exclusive. In a recent anthology, A Hausa Folk Tale, having recounted the usual fabulous incidents, ends with these words. They all came and they lived happily together. They had several sons and daughters who grew up and helped in raising the standard of education of our country. As I said elsewhere, if you consider this ending a naive anticlimax, then you cannot know very much about Africa. From Leeds University, 1960. The Novelist as a Teacher was a speech delivered at the Commonwealth Writers' Conference in Leeds during the year 1964. Okay, this conference is a conference of Commonwealth writers and scholars, and this is held at the Leeds University, in which these writers gather for them for a purpose of discussing ways in studying English literature. The speech was later added as an essay in Morning Yet on Creation Day in the year 9. This Morning Yet on Creation Day is a book in which the essays of Chinua Achebe are gathered. So it is a collection of essays by Chinua Achebe, and the first part of this book is focused on the literary, while the second part focuses on the a bit more generally on Africa. Chinua Achebe pointed out in this essay that world nations must respect the culture of each other. Another, European authors' right to entertain the people all over the world, while African authors have the right to acknowledge their very existence. Chinua Achebe said that African writers must not follow the British writer or these European authors because they must follow their own culture and must write for their readers instead of thinking about the European or American readers. Another is that African readers must need to change their mindset. Why? Because they have to appreciate their native culture. So they already lost their interest in reading about the native culture of Africa. Okay, a novelist is a teacher. According to Chinua Achebe, African writers must not be a mere storyteller only. Why? Because he or she need to ought to be a teacher. Why? Because propaganda is permissible in literature as long as there is no attempt to falsify facts. The spreading of ideas or information for a purpose of helping others is not prohibited by the government. For as long as you are not spreading false news, you are not spreading falsified facts, for as long as it is true. A novelist is a teacher also because he has to re-educate the society, restoring the old value. And that's what Chinua Achebe did. He observed that his society already lost failed to restore the old values of its country. That's why he wrote books in which it would awaken the people. Next, a novelist is a teacher because his prime aim is to help the society regain its faith in itself. Okay, as we can see, most of the readers of Chinua Achebe, as what he has stated in the essay, most of his readers are young. They are either in school or college, or they have recently left, and many of them look him as a kind of teacher. In fact, Chinua Achebe claimed that he said, "I am a political writer. My politics is concerned with universal communication across racial and cultural boundaries as a means of fostering respect for all people." In addition, African pottery is prized all over the world. Yet, Africans use tins and metalware because of the thought that their pottery was inferior. Chinua Achebe cited this example because these Africans believe that their pottery are of poor quality, where in fact, this pottery are sold all over the world, sold in other country, in all other countries in a very expensive price. So they use in exchange to this the tins and metalware, in which this is not a product of their country. This is a product of other countries. Another is that African school students considered their culture inferior. Another example, they felt ashamed to write about the African climate in front of Europeans. This is in support to the experience of his wife, which is an English teacher, because his wife encountered a boy. He asked a boy, why do this boy wrote about winter when he meant the harmattan? And then the boy said that other boys would call him, especially the European boys, would call him a bushman if he did such thing. Now, Chinua Achebe leave a question A question that, is there really something shameful in your weather? The African weather? From this, Chinua Achebe felt the urge that it is his business as a writer to teach a boy such as the boy cited in this example, that there is nothing disgraceful or shameful about the weather of Africa. So indeed, people must be proud of their own culture. Another is that Europeans have turned to anti-racist racism because they talk about African culture, rituals of being black, the black festivals and symbols, to give more importance of them. So they are talking about Africans, about their culture, but this is to give more importance of them. And this itself is already a racism. European writers believe that they have civilized the Africans from savagery. Africans believe this too, but there is no savagery because Africans have been turned against themselves. So it is just the Africans who are putting themselves down. Moreover, most of the African readers are young, and the writers must point them in the right direction. Upon knowing that most of the African readers are young people, Chinua Achebe realized that these young people needs writer in which it will point them in the right direction. Because some young readers, in fact, some young readers sent letters to Achebe asking him to write more. So these are evidences that these young people really loved the works of Chinua Achebe. However, some African older readers who were westernized wanted Achebe to follow European standards in his book. There are these old readers which are already westernized, They sent letters to Achebe asking him to follow European standards instead of African. But of course, Chinua Achebe refused. European discriminate the Africans because of their color and culture. So this is the reason of Chinua Achebe why he did not want to follow his writings according to European standards, because the Europeans discriminate the Africans, especially to their colors and their culture. And these things, Chinua Achebe said that he blames the Africans for this. Nothing should be blamed for this. Africans, for instance, never performed their native dances at festivals. They went for European dances instead because they thought that was civilized. In conclusion to this report, change isn't changeable. According to Chinua Achebe in this essay, the writer has freedom of his own, but he must consider the expectations of the readers. Whenever he gets a chance of educating his readers, he must do it. Society changes according to time, so a writer should also change his writing accordingly. So if you wanted to testify the content of this essay, I am inviting you to read his books, such as Things Fall Apart and others, so that you would know the beauty of his writings. Thank you for listening, and God bless us all. I hope you got something today.